Hey everybody, welcome to Garden Party. We're the virtual series from the Southern California News Group offering you tips, tricks, and insights into getting the most joy and productivity out of the gardening experience, and also helping you find a community of like-minded green thumbs, or in my case, wannabe green thumbs. Hi, I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the Special Projects Editor at SCNG. And I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers and all of you who've made our ongoing virtual series so popular. By the way, if you are a Reader Reward subscriber attending today, you're automatically entered to win a $100 gift certificate from Home Depot, which should come in handy for your gardening desires. I just need to tell you a few things before we get started. All attendees are muted to allow for the free flow of conversation, but if you have questions, and we hope you do, use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar on your screen. And certainly if you want to make comments, use the chat feature found there as well. We'll be monitoring questions and we'll respond to as many as possible. This session will be videotaped and a link will be sent to you so you can share it or just, revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events. And that's where you can find all of our past events as well as see what's coming up. Now it's my pleasure to introduce your host for Garden Party, SCNG's beloved syndicated columnist and author of Frumpy Middle-Aged Mom, Dispatches from the Front Lines of Motherhood, my friend, Marla Jo Fisher. Hey, Marla.
Hey, Samantha, how are you? All right, I'm trying to show you this. This is my money tree. It's the one and only houseplant I've ever been able to keep alive, although I noticed more little leaves are falling off of it. So I really need this session. If you know me, you know I can't keep a plant alive no matter what, even though my mom was one of those people that would walk by and pinch off plants everywhere she went, and then she would stick them in dirt and they would grow into amazing, trees.
No, my dear, and clearly you did not get that gene. Anyway, good luck. I'm going to beam out. Have a good show.
Thank you. And I'm only here for comic relief, okay? So what I like to do here is introduce Mr. Joshua Siskin, who is not only our plant expert for the Southern California News Group and a fabulous columnist, but also a licensed psychotherapist. So if you feel you need houseplants and you need a shrink, you've got the perfect guy. And so he's got this plan by which he's going to explain to us several different things that we need to know to grow houseplants. And, as a lot of you know, it's become even more important in the pandemic because of being stuck inside, all of us stuck inside. And after I introduce Joshua, I'm also going to introduce Vanessa Franco, who's an editor at the Southern California News Group. In fact, she's one of my editors, so I'm always really nice to her. And she's a woman who has become obsessed with houseplants since the pandemic started, and her house is now covered with them, which she names after rock stars, and she plays music to them, and she sings to them, I think. I don't know how her husband gets along with that. But anyway, so let's start with Joshua. Joshua, what do we need to know about houseplants to keep them alive?
Yeah, well, I think it's maybe beneficial to talk about container plants in general. I mean, houseplants are a subset of that, but the minute you raise a plant in a container, you're totally responsible for it. It's almost like a child. It's like a friend. I think during the pandemic, one of the reasons people are getting involved in houseplants is because they are kind of isolated. They don't have that human contact. They need something to nurture. They need something to love. And it's the beauty of taking care of plants is that you make the difference, right? You can't make excuses. Oh, the plant this, the plant that, which I think is very beneficial in human relationships. How we tend to point the finger and says, oh, if only my partner would change, everything would work out. But no, if you want your partner to change, you have to change first, right? And so when you're looking at a plant, it's like, it's all on me. It's up to me. I have to be the mentor, the guide, the nurturer. And I think that's very beneficial.
Let me ask you the first question, okay? Which was my question, so of course it's the most important. How do I pick a plant? I mean, where do I go to buy a plant? I mean, do I have to go to one of those bougie, expensive stores? Can I just go to the cheapest place around, or how do I do that? And how do I pick a plant? I mean, obviously, I don't want a plant that looks half dead, but how do I know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you don't have to go to a boutique place. I mean, there are advantages in going to a boutique place, or let's say a plant shop where you get to know the owner, and the owner starts to know something about the conditions that pertain to growing plants inside your house, right? And they sort of follow you as you progress, and so you have a relationship with this person who's a plant expert, and that can take you a long way. By the same token, you can find fantastic plants at Home Depot and Lowe's. I've seen gorgeous indoor plants, and if you can get them for less, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think there's kind of a maybe a reverence for indoor plants that's misplaced. Okay, at the end of the day, they're just biological creations, and you can find beauties wherever they're sold. I think.
Okay, so what if oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Joshua, go ahead.
No, I was going to say Armstrong Nurseries, which are throughout Southern California. I recommend them because they have people on staff, generally speaking, that are pretty knowledgeable. The disadvantage of going to the box stores is you don't find people with knowledge. That's the problem. When you go to the smaller, even when you go to an Armstrong Nurseries or a boutique nursery, you're going to talk to people who have the expertise that you want. That's the difference. Yeah.
All right, so let me ask you this. What if I have a room that doesn't have very much light? Okay. Can I still have a houseplant in it, or do I have to buy one made out of rubber?
Well, it's called artificial lighting. Okay. Fluorescent lighting, tube lighting is highly recommended if you can grow anything with that. And also, if you have a plant on your desk and you get a gooseneck lamp, right? We're all familiar with gooseneck lamps that we use for reading, right? And they even have them with two. Okay, if you go online, you can find a two-prong gooseneck lamp. So you could put that in a dark corner, right? Put the one plant under each. You put an LED light into the gooseneck lamp, and you'll be fine. You can grow anything. You can grow anything to solar.
And I highly recommend snake plants. Snake plants don't need a lot of light. I put all of my snake plants in one giant pot this weekend because I was like, oh, it's one pot. It will take up less space than all of my other snake plants all over the place.
Yeah. Well,
what's the name of that one?
This is a snake. I've got 3 different kinds of snake plants in here. I've got a yellow edge, I've got the moonshine, and then I've got the common one that I actually don't remember the name of, but it looks cool.
So, Joshua, how do you pick? Do you buy those expensive bags of soil, or what do you put your plants in?
No, you don't have to buy any soil. Not when you're growing indoor plants. Everything's already there. The plant's in the pot with the soil. It's only if you want to repot later on to a larger size, you get the soil. Let me just go through a few things, because you mentioned light, and that's really the major issue. I think the reason people fail when they grow indoor plants, especially orchids, flowering plants, is they don't give them enough light. It's really almost impossible to give your plant too much light. If you live, especially, let's put it this way, if you live in a neighborhood like I do with a lot of mature trees and tall hedges, very little light gets in, okay? So you want to put the plants close to the windows, okay? And benefit from, I would say, 10 to 12 hours of light, not direct light, but ambient light, okay? And if you do that, you're going to be successful, okay? The shadiest spot in your garden gets more light than the brightest window in your house. Keep that in mind. You're actually better off living in a 20-story tower apartment building, which we really don't have in LA very much. Most people are pretty close to the ground. you're better off in a 20-story apartment because there you have light, coming from every direction. If there's too much, you put like a sheer curtain over the window, right? And but you have a lot more control over how much light comes in. Okay. In our situation, where most of us are living in homes or maybe apartment buildings with a few floors, the amount of light that's available tends to be much less than a lot of plants would appreciate. And you can always implement, you can always supplement with artificial lighting if you need it.
Okay, let me ask you this because we have so many questions already.
Wow.
So let's talk about, I want to ask you about water briefly, but then there's my favorite question, which several people have already asked, which is about those stupid little gnats that have killed a lot of my plants. But first, let me just ask you, okay, so water, I mean, how can you keep your plants alive, and how do you know how much to water them?
Okay, so there are many different ways that you can tell when it's time to water, and it takes experience and it takes study. Some people, if you have a lot of plants, some people have what they call an indicator plant. In other words, they know when they stick their finger into the soil, okay, up to the first knuckle, if the soil is dry in that indicator plant, they're going to water everything, or maybe the second knuckle. So it's kind of like a lot of it is trial and error, okay, or I should say experimentation. Another thing people do is lift up the container. They know what it feels like when it's full of water, and they know what it feels like when it's dry, just by lifting it up. If you want to be super safe, you buy what's called a moisture meter. You can get these online. They're very inexpensive. They're probably $10 to $15. You stick it in your plant, you stick it in the soil, and it's going to tell you if you need to water. Okay. That's another way you can tell.
So I do both of those, right? Like I lift them up and I also touch the plant. So I bottom water, and I learned this from you're talking about plant stores. By the way, hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm one of the editors. I only got into plants during the pandemic in this past year. And I now have 40 of them in my living room. You can't tell that I swear it does not actually make my apartment look like a jungle. But I got really into them, and I live here in Riverside. There's a great little plant shop downtown called Peep, and they taught me about bottom watering. So the idea is, instead, I don't use there's no drainage layer at the bottom. I put the pot in a drip tray, in a normal plant saucer, and I fill the plant saucer with water, and it soaks it up from the bottom. So then I know when it's at the top, when it feels damp on the top, that one's good to go. That one's been watered. And, some of them, mine get kind of, it depends on the plant, right? My peperomias don't need to be watered as often as my spotted angel wing begonia right here. This is Whitney Houston. She's one of my pickier plants, but I absolutely love her. So I do that. And I also can kind of tell usually, because I know how heavy they are, what they will how just like Joshua was saying, if it feels really light, I'll check the soil. Okay, that one probably needs a drink. So I do that. I have not experimented with going. I mean, we've been in the pandemic. I haven't gone anywhere yet. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. I know we had a question about that too. Now that people are going out again in the pandemic and going on vacation, can you leave your plants without watering them for a week? How long can you do that, and what can you do if you're going away? How do you water them?
Right. So of course it depends on the size of the plant. The bigger the plant, the less often it has to be watered, right? Obviously, if you have something in a small container, then you're going to have to water it more frequently. Generally speaking, if you're talking about a plant, let's say in an average size pot, maybe a 6-inch pot, you're talking about 5 to 10 days to that it can go between watering. Now
there one like that. This is probably 5 to 10 days.
Perfect. Yeah, and another thing you can do is, and again, when you have 40 plants, I don't know if it's practical, but what you can do, if you have a larger pot, you take your smaller pot, and what you do is you put a layer of peat moss. I don't know if you know, peat moss is this spongy remnants of sphagnum moss. Anyway, it holds a lot of water. So you soak this peat moss really, really wet, right? You put it inside the larger container, like all around the edge, and then you put your container with your plant after you've already watered it. You've already watered it, but now it has this insulation around it that's
Oh,
going to keep
wow.
it moist. Okay.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So if you're going away for a couple of weeks, they generally say that most indoor plants will survive if you're gone for 2 weeks. You know, if they're in a reasonable size container. If they're in a tiny container, maybe not. But if they're in a reasonable size container, they can usually handle 2 weeks, which tells you something about indoor plants and how we tend to overwater them, and you know, we kill them with kindness.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to try that actually. But let me ask you, okay, so gnats, oh my gosh, I love to cook with herbs and I keep trying to plant an herb garden in my kitchen window, but they always get these stupid little gnats in them and then they die. And I don't seem to, I've done everything I can think of to try to get rid of them, but is there anything I can do?
Yeah, well, the solution is to get a dish of vinegar, right? And put the vinegar out, mix a little dish soap in with the vinegar, and they will go for the vinegar and they'll die. Okay.
Wow.
So that's what we do. Now, if you want to grow plants that you'll never have fungus gnats, you see fungus gnats, they call fungus gnats because they live on fungus that grows in the potting mix. If you have a completely artificial potting mix, which consists of like a perlite, vermiculite, and peat moss, you'll never have fungus gnats. The reason you get fungus gnats is because some potting soils have decomposed pine bark. Okay, that's a very common additive or ingredient of soil mixes, and that's what brings on the fungus gnats. Okay.
So how do I know? I mean, what do I look for if I want to look for the artificial soil?
Well,
how do
that's a
I
good
look for
question.
it?
You probably have to make the soil yourself. You probably have to make it yourself. It's true. You'd have to transfer the plant. You'd have to shake off the, the soil that it came in, right? And then you'd have to put them into this artificial mix, which, generally speaking, it's a third of perlite, a third vermiculite, and a third peat moss. I mean, just you might vary the percentages depending on what kind of plant you're growing, but that's usually the amounts. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at the questions we have, and one of them is from a lady who, it says her philodendron leaves are turning yellow and brown, and she wants to know what is she doing wrong?
It could be either overwatering or underwatering. That's a problem with plants, you know. You really, if you don't see the soil conditions, then it's really hard to pass judgment. But it's really not it's the roots that are suffering. You know, everything starts in the roots, right? People tend to think if the plant has a problem, you look at what you can see, right? You look at the leaves, you look at the stems. But when you're talking about plant pathology, it's nearly always in the roots that you have the problem. I mean, yeah, sometimes you see there are insects. That's obvious. But if you don't see any insects, then something's going on down below. It could be a fungus disease because of overwatering, or just suffocation, right? If the soil is too moist, the roots can't breathe. Roots need oxygen like people, okay? And if the soil pores fill with water, it means there's no oxygen there anymore, and the roots die. Okay.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never knew that was what the problem was. I want to ask you, Tay Espinoza wants to know, what about using ice cubes to water?
Yeah, that works. That definitely works.
That'll work? Okay. And then let's see, Barbara Foster wants to know if you have a website you recommend to learn about caring for plants. And how do you go about identifying their variety?
Okay, first of all, the very best, in my opinion, davesgarden.com. And one of the features on the site is if you don't know the name of a plant, you take a picture, you upload it to the site. By the way, registration is free. You don't have to pay for any of this. You upload the photo to the website, and within usually an hour or so, somebody on the site will identify the plant.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have any plant and every plant is there. Now, if you want to identify a plant right? But that's, if you want to identify a plant yourself, they have these apps now, a whole bunch of apps where you hover your camera over the plant, you take a picture, right? And then you send it to the app, and the name of the plant is revealed. Not always, I must say, not always, but often enough you will find out the name. And in other words, if you want to do it instantaneously like that.
Okay, Linda McCracken says, if we set vinegar out to kill the gnats, won't they still keep breeding? And how can you kill the Can you kill a fungus to stop the gnats completely?
That's another issue. That's another issue. If you kill the gnats that are out there, yeah. So what if they laid eggs before they flew, right? If they flew off. So that's when you want to change your potting soil. As a general rule, it's a good idea to change your potting soil once a year.
All right, let me ask you this. Okay, what are the most foolproof houseplants that you really can't kill?
Okay. Well, Vanessa was showing one, the snake plant, Sansevieria. Take another look. Yeah, and actually, that's looks like more of the dwarf snake plant. There's one that's very tall. I was in LAX not too long ago, and they had this other snake plant. It's very, very long. It's very, very tall. I mean, these things must have been around 4 feet tall. And they had, it's the snake plant with a yellow stripe along the edges of the leaf, and it was in this huge yellow ceramic pot. It was actually very well done. But yeah, that would be at the top of the list. And then, because it doesn't need much water. And then the other one would be, this is called spider plant. And you see how this, what happens is it sends out these shoots with baby spider. You see, it looks like a spider, right, hanging out. And this, if you look, you can see roots coming out of these little babies that are forming on the tendrils that are coming out of the plant. And this is another indestructible one. Really, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to. It has these kind of bulbs underneath the soil that if you ever plant this in your garden, you'll probably regret it because it's almost impossible to kill. You try to dig it up and you can't. So that would be the other one, and then another one that there's one plant that you can't overwater, and that's called umbrella plant. It's a relative of papyrus. You know papyrus that grows in the Nile River, right? It's a pond plant. Well, this one, Cyperus alternifolius, or umbrella plant, impossible to kill. And there's one more here if I can remember. Yeah, the cast iron plant is another one. It's called aspidistra. It has these very elegant kind of oval leaves, but they taper off. So those would be the 4 that I would recommend that you couldn't kill.
So Vanessa.
Yes.
I understand that you talk to your plants and you play music to them.
Okay, so like I got into this in the pandemic. Everybody was baking bread. I couldn't find flour anywhere, so I got into the plants instead. And it gave me like kind of purpose, like something I had to keep an eye on. So I started when I started getting a couple. Like my first one is George Michael. None of my plants are named after people who've died, but this is George Michael. He's a Monstera deliciosa. He was in a 4-inch pot when I got him. He is giant now. So he actually can't even fit the full frame in the video here. So I started, getting that. And I was like, well, I love music. I was a longtime music reporter before I became an editor. And since my office is the living room, I started naming the plants and then like playing them the soundtrack of whoever I've named them after. So it was nice because it also got me to like get up during the day and like stretch and like not be sitting and editing everybody's stories like all the time without moving. So then I kind of turned it into giving them a whole photo shoot. And I play them whoever they're named after. So George Michael gets George Michael's solo catalog and also Wham. And I take like photos of them and videos. I started a Plantstagram, if you will, called Plants That Rock, where I document all of them. but it's good because it's also like when I check on them and I play music, like it's good for me because I'm getting up and I'm moving around and I'm checking in on the plants, but it's also good to make sure I have not killed any of the plants. So I love them. And so, yeah, like I've tried to do a whole photo shoot with all, well, I have a Hall & Oates. I'm a big fan of Hall & Oates. So like I did photo shoots with Hall individually and then Oates individually and then together. I have 2 Dracaenas. So Hall, this one's Hall because he's taller, right? Which makes sense because if you've ever seen Daryl Hall, he's taller than John Oates. And here's John Oates, who's like little and adorable. And so yeah, so they're both Dracaenas. Like this one's Oates is a lemon lime Dracaena. Hall is a moonlight carousel Dracaena. So I did photo shoots with them separately and then together. I may have bought some more albums that I didn't have just so I could give them better photo shoots. Like that just happened with my peperomias that are named after the brothers Gibb, also known as the Bee Gees. I have them here. I have like 4 different peperomias in one pot that I found, and I absolutely love them. And yesterday, somebody outside was like playing some music from their car, so I opened up the screen door, and guess what? They got to hear the Bee Gees main course record, so they were lucky.
So, Joshua, what do you think I mean, do you have any idea whether plants actually respond to music and talking to them and so forth?
You know, let's put it this way. The best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. In other words, I think what's really happening with Vanessa is she's doing all these things that are very like personal to her and special to her relationship with the plants, but it's really the fact that she's there all the time doing something with her plants. Okay, so it's like, you know, whatever we do to bring about that interaction with our plants, it's all about gardening and houseplant keeping is all about observation, right?
All right. Okay. So Uda Van Dam wants to know, and I also want to know, and so does our host, Samantha Dunn, about orchids. And I see an orchid right behind you right now. And I've bought orchids at Trader Joe's before, and I just wait till the flowers fall off and then I throw them away. Is there anything I should be doing instead?
Well, first of all, one thing we have to understand, most orchids do not grow indoors very well, if at all. Okay, most orchids need more light than we have in our residences, okay? And even though you will see a variety of orchids, it's going to be much more difficult to grow most of them. The reason you see this orchid the most, this is called a moth orchid, Phalaenopsis. The reason you see it is because it does not need as much light as the other orchids. That's the major reason, okay? And because it can handle the kind of light that comes through your windows. Now, again, you're gonna have to have 10 or 12 hours of light, ambient light. I know somebody who has an incredible orchid collection and he gets direct sun until 9:30 in the morning. That's it, but it's not direct. I mean, it's on a windowsill that has a kind of a sheer curtain, right? So the sun is coming right through that curtain directly until 9:30 in the morning. The rest of the day, the sun is gone. The sun is over his house, okay? But there's ambient light, right? He's got good light there for 12 hours of the day, right? 10 to 12 hours of the day. That's what you need to grow orchids, okay? Now, there's another interesting point. The only containers they recommend be transparent are containers of orchids. Why? I don't know if you can see, but if you look closely, the roots of the orchid turn green when they're exposed to the sun. Why? Because of photosynthesis. You know, photosynthesis is the process where plants take carbon dioxide out of the air and they take water, they take carbon dioxide through their leaf pores, right? And then they take water up through their roots. They combine the carbon dioxide with the water to make sugar, which is what plants sustain themselves, right? They're autonomous creatures. you know, we say we feed plants. We're not really feeding plants. We're giving them supplements, okay? Because their real food is the sugar they make out of the carbon dioxide in the water. So the point is, these roots of orchids do photosynthesis. You see, in the tropics, orchids are epiphytes. Epiphytes means an epiphytic plant is a plant that lives on another plant, okay? They live up in trees, right? And their roots are totally exposed. Their roots are exposed to the sun, and so they photosynthesize. So the roots are making food for the plant, is the point, right?
So is it better to buy an orchid in a clear plastic container like that?
It definitely is better. They're not often sold like that, you know, because people think it's you know, I don't know, I guess people don't think it's that elegant, right? And but that's the, you can get these pots online, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Just check, you know, orchid pots and you'll be able to find them. But
and do they, I'm thinking that they probably need a lot of water. Do they need a lot of water?
So generally speaking, you're talking about once a week, okay? And you can either water them from below or from above. The only thing you want to do is probably, or definitely, you want to water once a month from the top in order to flush out the minerals from the fertilizer, the salt. Fertilizers contain salt that are damaging to roots, okay? So you want to flush the water out by copiously watering from above. I mean, we should, when it comes to fertilizer, we haven't mentioned it, but the mantra that you adopt is concerning fertilizer is weekly. In other words, weekly with 2 E's, in other words, once a week, and then weekly, W-E-A-K-L-Y, right? In other words, you water once a week, but you do it with a weak solution. So if you have a product that they recommend you water once a month with a certain concentration, you divide that concentration into 4 and you water it once a week. Every time you water. A lot of people fertilize every time they water their plants, okay?
So what would be, is there just a general fertilizer that would work for all houseplants?
Well, generally speaking, the fertilizer that's generally recommended is something what's called balanced, where you have there are 3 major elements in a fertilizer, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and you'll see 3 numbers separated by dashes. So they'll recommend 20, 20, 20, 16, 16, 16, 14, 14, 14. With orchids, it's a little bit different, and African violets too. You can buy proprietary fertilizers for orchids and African violets. Okay, but you could get away with a 20, 20, 20. Okay, it wouldn't be. It would probably be fine. So.
You know, somebody was talking about, we've had a lot of questions about Fiddle Leaf Figs. This one's mine. This one's John Lennon. And
yeah, go ahead.
So somebody said, like, you know, how to keep the dust off the leaves. That was something that came up. And I think somebody else said that they had a problem with the light, with like, they didn't have good light for it, or they needed filtered light. Can you talk a little bit? Because I mean, Fiddle Leaf Figs, they're everywhere. They're all over Instagram.
Right.
Like this one's a baby one.
Yeah.
Like, and they can get really expensive. How do you keep them alive? Because
Yeah.
I'm very invested in this.
Yeah, well, they need good light. Ficus across the board need good light. If you're talking about, you know, the weeping fig, the Ficus benjamina, right? Everybody else. So that's really crucial. I know a good friend of mine has a huge one right underneath the skylight. Okay, so it's basically benefiting from the sun, all day sun. Okay, and then again, weekly watering. I mean, I know of a. It's I don't know if you know the Valley. There's a car dealership called Cassidy Cadillac. It's on the corner of Ventura Boulevard and Beverly Glen. I don't know if you know Van Nuys. Anyway, for the last 30 years, I have seen the same Fiddle Leaf Fig growing in their showroom, okay? It goes all the way to the ceiling. It's gotta be at least, it's gotta be 30 feet at least. And when it touches the ceiling, they cut it back and it grows back up again. So I don't think the root system is, the roots are, it's not a huge area for growing a tree, right? It's basically a tree at this point. And it's, it's a modest sized planter that this tree is growing in. So I think they're pretty tough plants. And they're also, we haven't spoken yet, but propagation, you can propagate that plant without a lot of difficulty in water, okay? You take some of its stem, you cut it, we haven't mentioned propagation yet, but that's one of the beauties of growing indoor plants, that you can propagate virtually anything. And so no matter how expensive a plant is, you can make more of it, is what I'm saying. Even orchids, there's a way, I don't know if we have time to go into that now, but virtually any indoor plant you can propagate. So you're going to have a lot more if you want them.
Someone asked specifically about Dracaenas and like how to propagate them, and that they have cuttings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay, so Dracaenas are, you would cut off the top, okay?
So I cut off the whole top, or just like part of it?
Yeah, you would cut off. See, this is so small. I don't know if I'd try to propagate that one yet.
Okay, hold on. Don't worry. We'll get Daryl Hall back on here.
So that's a classic case. You would cut it off right above a node. A node is like, they call it a leaf scar, right? Yeah, I would cut it off. Yeah, maybe like further down.
Like here?
Yeah, there. Or even further, further. Yeah, there you go, there you go. Cut it there. Put it in a mix of, let's say half peat moss, half perlite, right? And it should root. Put it in rooting hormone.
Okay.
At a nursery, they have rooting hormone. Okay, it's just it looks like talc. It looks like talcum powder when you open the little comes in little jars. You dip it in there, then you put it. You want to make sure that you make a hole in your perlite peat moss, because you don't want to jam it in, because then the root hormone will disappear, because it'll be rubbed off on the sides of the. It'll be rubbed off in the soil. So you make a nice hole with your finger, right? So there's enough room. When you put that in there, the root hormone will stay. Then you firm it up, and this is going to sprout. Where you cut here, right? You cut right at a joint. Yeah, a little further down. Yeah, here, right? Yeah, I'm touching the screen like, yeah.
Very interactive.
We haven't gotten there yet. But anyway, yeah, and it's going to sprout where you cut it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And of course, that's not true for all plants, right? You wouldn't want to do that with a palm, right? If you cut the head off of a palm tree, it dies, right? And what you cut is not going to propagate anyway. Okay, so I mean, you have to know which plants you can do that to. It's usually the cane plants like Dracaena that you can do that with. Yeah.
Okay, well, Joshua, I was mentioning to you that my mom was one of those people that could not walk down the street without picking at least 3 or 4 cuttings off every plant she saw. Right. And so if you were in a situation like that, would you just stick them in water, or what would you do?
First of all, by the way, if you engage in that practice, it's recommended that you first ask the person enough. I mean, and they'll always say yes, by the way. When it comes to plants, people are very generous. I find that. Anyway, so you would be surprised. I'm glad you mentioned that you can propagate almost, I'm not going to say almost any plant. You can propagate a lot of plants in water. Not if you're taking a woody stem, okay? But if a plant has some succulence to it, you can propagate it in water. It's not such a stretch. I shouldn't say succulence necessarily, but you have to know your plants. You have to know which ones. But most of them you can't. If you take like a 6-inch cutting, we're talking about landscape ornamentals. If you take a 6-inch cutting from almost any shrub, as long as it's the greener part, what we call terminal cuttings, right? After the plant has started to grow in the spring, you don't want to do a woody cutting, but after the plant has started to grow in the spring and it puts out about 6 inches of growth, if you snip that, a lot of times you just stick it in the soil and it'll grow, or you put it in a glass of water and it will root. You know, especially if you do in the spring and summer. Fall or winter, it's a different story. But when things are actively growing, they will propagate like that. A lot of herbs can be propagated in that manner. Things like rosemary, things like sage, right? You can easily propagate from that, what they call softwood cuttings. You know, you take the 4 to 6 inches, you stick it in a glass of water, and it'll start to root. Yeah.
What do you think about your favorite plants? Somebody wants to know, what are your personal favorite plants?
Good question.
Well, I got really into calatheas. I have probably more calatheas than any other ones, which was probably not smart for like a beginning indoor houseplant person. So this one's Elton John. He's a rattlesnake one. I love them because they move. They're also called prayer plants. So during the day, you can see like his leaves kind of like are spread out like this. At night, they go up like that. So he's dancing and a showman, and I love him. And I have a ton of them. Those are actually the ones I've killed the most of too, because I learned, so if you're into calatheas, there are kind of two kinds. There are ones that have like a smoother, shiny leaf, like the rattlesnake. And then there are ones that have like a velvety leaf, and those are like your medallion. So I kind of killed Elvis Costello and Kate Bush, and I feel really bad about it. I killed Elvis Costello because I like underwatered him because I was trying not to overwater. But those are my favorites.
Vanessa, could you show us that? We couldn't really, that's gorgeous.
Yeah.
If you could show us the leaves a little bit better.
Here.
Oh, yeah. Gorgeous.
This is Elton John. He's great.
Yeah.
He's great. And they have the coolest patterns too. I have another one here handy. It's a Burl Marksy. I'm a big fan of Britpop. This one's named after Damon Albarn of Blur. And you can see like they have the coolest markings. I love them. And then, like I said, they dance, they move. Sometimes I actually got freaked out because it was quiet and I just kept hearing things. And then I realized it was my plants. I didn't have a ghost. I just have plants that dance.
So speaking of favorites, this is definitely one of my favorites because it's called anthurium. Some people call it flamingo lily. It's not really a lily, but it's the reason I like this plant is because this is not actually a flower. It's called a spathe. This heart-shaped. It almost has the texture of plastic, and that's called a spadix. The flowers come out of the spadix, but they're so tiny they don't look like anything. But in any event, you can keep this thing pushing out these spathes all year long just by doing regular watering and fertilizing. It's a very, very resilient plant. It'll just keep going and going and going. And it also it's sort of clumping, so it'll make new ones. I don't know if you can see here, but they're like, I don't know if you can see, they're coupled together. But anyway, so it self-propagates like that. It comes from the South American tropics, and it's interesting. There are a lot of this is called an aroid, and you can recognize an aroid by these spathes. Vanessa mentioned a spathiphyllum. That's a very common one. It's called peace lily. It has a white, right? It has like a white sheath, and it has one of these coming out of it. It's in the same group of plants. Also philodendrons. I don't know if you've ever seen philodendrons. When they put out their spade, they put out these huge things that are they're eaten by the indigenous people in South America. They eat these things. They're very nutritious. Okay, it's like 5 times or really huge and really, really thick. And the other one is pothos, a very common indoor plant. That's also one of these. When those things, you have one? Oh, good.
I have one. This one's my pothos and joy. This is Carol King.
Oh,
Her life has been a tapestry. I have another giant golden pothos. That's Slash from Guns N' Roses, but he's larger than my KitchenAid mixer, so he's not camera ready. But this one, the pothos are great. They're really easy to care for. They are, they don't need super, super bright light. And I love them a lot. Yeah, I think they're easy. They're great. They're really pretty. And I haven't killed it yet.
I was once in New Orleans, and these, I saw pothos growing down from the balconies, and the leaves were huge. I don't know if you know, but if, you know, one of the questions I saw was, you know, how old, you know, how long do houseplants live? Houseplants can live for dozens of years, okay? And if you grow a pothos for years and years and years, the leaves get huge, okay?
Yeah.
And then it's like, it's almost like a transformation, you know, it's almost like you have a different plant than you thought you were growing. Because normally we just see the little leaves. But if you water it and you fertilize it and you change the soil every year and you really, you know, you really do everything that the plant desires, it's going to grow like crazy.
Hey, you know, Donna's got a really good question here, and I think it's something we have to talk about because we talked about fungus gnats, but she's got little scales and sap on her anthurium. What causes it, and how do I get rid of it? It sounds like to me she's got spider mites. It could be spider mites. I know that my plant, Simon LeBon, who's a Calthea, got sticky, and he brought spider mites to everyone. Everybody got a neem shower. Like it was a whole thing.
Right. So go ahead. Tell them about your experience with
So
spider
I was looking, I was like, why does it look like my plant's wet when it's not? Like, why are the leaves wet? And I touched it and it was sticky. And I was like, this is not great. And it turned out that it was, I looked on the internet and I, you know, reached out to my plant people at my plant store, and I had spider mites. So if you've got spider mites, or scale can also do this too. The scale, I don't know if scale gets the stickiness. I know the spider mites definitely do. So basically, they recommended using some neem oil. So one of the things is, in Southern California especially, it's so dry here that like spider mites and some of the pests really like these dry conditions. So if you don't have a humidifier, you might want to get one. I have a humidifier now. I also missed the undersides of the leaves to make sure that, because they don't like the wet. But it was a thing. And if you don't catch the pests right away, I mean, it can decimate everything. Like I had to quarantine Simon, and like I used the neem oil. I found neem oil spray and I sprayed it on everybody that was around him. And like, I think I did it twice, like once a week for like 2 or 3 weeks. So that seemed to get it in check. But I mean, you always want to like what Joshua was saying before, you want to interact with your plants because you're also going to catch if there are any problems on it. So I use neem oil. That seems to have worked. I now have a humidifier, which is also good. Somebody asked about the crunchy brown tips. That means that your plants are not getting enough humidity. Again, a big problem here in Southern California. Yep. So I've got a little humidifier for them. Also, grouping plants together can help. And I also have some trays with pebbles that I put some water on. You don't want the water to go up so that it's watering the plant, but just as the water evaporates, that gives some humidity for the plants. So those are things that can definitely help. But yeah, I'm really sorry, wonderful person out there with the anthurium with the stickiness. I think you've got spider mites, and definitely quarantine that plant if you can, because you don't want to get and check your other plants. It's not good. It's a battle. Somehow I didn't lose anybody on it, but I mean, I lost some leaves, and you know, Simon's still coming back from it. But yeah, that's something you got to keep an eye out on. But yeah, again, looking at the pests, that if you're checking on your plants, you'll catch the thing early. You can also tell spider mites too, because they've got webbing. And if you've got tomatoes, they like to get your tomatoes too. That's why I've been keeping an eye out. Speaking of tomatoes, our next one, we have a tomato newsletter. We have a tomato newsletter, and our next garden party Zoom is all about tomatoes. So if you go to, we'll put the link in the chat, but definitely sign up for our garden party newsletter all about tomatoes. It's awesome. Alex Groves writes it. I am learning how to grow tomatoes and hopefully not killing them. And we talk about spider mites in there too.
And let me just throw in that you can see Joshua's column every week in all the Southern California newspapers. So definitely take a look and follow along. And there's also an archive online of his past columns. And he has a book about gardening in Los Angeles, which if you just, I'm sure if you do an online search for his name, you'll find it. What do we got, Joshua?
We're just a little short on time. I want to make sure I bring this out. This is an aloe. It's not aloe vera, and I really don't know the species. It was kind of a leftover in the nursery, and they gave me a really good deal on it, but it has no tag, which is fine with me. And by the way, I could probably make 20 plants out of this. Let me just tell you something about aloe. We think of aloe vera, and it's a beautiful plant. You know, if you have an aloe vera, the leaves are probably about a foot tall, and the flowers are yellow. Okay, if the flowers are yellow and the leaves are a foot tall, you know you have an aloe vera. but many of the aloes have the same property, right? I break a leaf. I don't know if you can see the sticky stuff here, right? If you have burns and you break an aloe leaf, you rub it over the burn, right? And it takes away the sting. But the reason I brought this out is because there's, we've been talking about leafy indoor plants, but there are also succulents, right? And if you want to build a menagerie of plants that can handle being away for 2 weeks, you would go in the direction of succulents, because they're really incredibly sturdy in terms of not needing very much water. So I just want to bring that in. And another point, when you propagate a succulent, you wouldn't do it by breaking a leaf like this, but when you cut off a stem of a succulent, you want to wait a week for the end of the stem that you cut to produce what's called callus, C-A-L-L-U-S. It's not the same callus as you have on your foot, but it's like a protective layer. So now when you put it into your soil medium to root it, it won't get fungus, because it'll be like the wound will be dried out, and it'll be a protective covering, and so you won't have to worry about that. So if you propagate a succulent plant, always wait a week after you've broken off the piece you're going to propagate before you stick it in the soil. So.
Joshua, have you got any other plants there you want to talk to us about, or have we gone through them all?
So we're talking, because somebody asked about the flowering plants, and I think the big three of flowering plants are the Phalaenopsis orchid, the anthurium or flamingo lily. I guess the peace lily would probably be you could also put it in that category. And then this one, which is the African violet. And the African violet is a lot like the orchid in terms of what it requires. It's probably going to need to be watered once a week. The one thing you want to be very careful with is that you don't water the leaves, because the leaves are kind of hairy. And if you water the leaves are going to get spotty and they're going to get fungusy, automatic. Somebody, I think one of these things said, how about watering with a turkey baster? Well, I mean, that works. It might be a little tedious, but yeah, you can definitely water from below, keeping in mind that if you're going to fertilize, and you can put the fertilizer in the water that comes up from the bottom, but you're going to want to still flush once a month through, because what happens is if that fertilizer accumulates in the soil, then it's going to get too salty, and that's going to cause damage to the plant. So you just want to be aware of that you're always going to want to flush the water through the soil once a month.
Hey, you know what? One thing we haven't talked about is a lot of people like to have hanging plants. We haven't talked at all about hanging plants, and I pretty much killed every hanging plant I ever tried to grow.
Maybe it's because, hanging plants need more water than others, because in fact, the higher up you go in your home or your apartment, the more frequently you have to water, right? Because the warm air rises, right? So if you have plants growing on shelves, you're going to have to water them more often than plants growing on the floor. And plants growing in hanging baskets, same issue, right? They're going to need more careful attention when it comes to watering. This is a great one. The spider plant is an excellent candidate for a hanging basket, because the spiders hang down, and it's kind of a curiosity. Yeah. So, I mean,
well, I hate to come in and spoil the party, you guys, but we're almost at the top of the hour, and I want to thank everybody. Joshua, certainly, Vanessa, and your rock stars. Nice to meet you. And as always, Marla, thanks so much. I just want to say, I love the fact that I got those 6 basic points: the light, water, soil, fertilization, humidity, and propagation. So thank you for that. I and many other beginning gardeners have some place to concentrate. We're going to be following up with in the papers with answers to all of these great questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to everything, but there was just so much. And if you'd like to send us more questions, please email gardening@scng.com, and also sign up for the Garden Party newsletter. which we will have a link for soon. And you can always go to scng.com/virtual events for more information. Joshua's column, just to remind you, is in Saturday's papers and online in our publications. And his website is thesmartgardener.com. Also, once again, Vanessa already gave it a shout out, but please join us again for our next garden party on May 19th on everything tomato. And if you want more insights from our experts, sign up for that gardening party newsletter. By the way, my bad, today's Reader Rewards subscribers are entered to win a $50 Barnes & Noble gift card, which will be great for some gardening books, don't you think? Anyway, I'd like to invite you to something else. This Friday, we've got April 23rd, we've got Bookish with Marlo Thomas, Erica Schickel, and Peter Sagal from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR. To register, again, go to scng.com/virtual events. As always, I encourage you to read our newspapers and visit our websites to stay informed, and perhaps just as important, to be entertained. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or you have any additional questions on anything, please, questions on virtual programs in particular, please email us at events@scng.com. And once again, crew, thank you. Go happy planting, and we'll see you next time.